Alright, it is time for another episode of Buff Breakdown, where I take like 10 minutes to blabber about the new buffs, and oh boy, we got some buffs today. Relating to Lost Build 6.5, we got some nice stuff. 2 buffs in store for today, and I think both of them, I can already tell you, they're both very, very good. Maybe not the most exciting buffs ever in terms of what they did, but hey, they are definitely great buffs. So yeah, let's just get right into it. First of all, as you can see, we got Mr. Detective himself back with another buff, his second buff ever. And again, it's for another one of his skills. Last time they buffed skill number 1, now they buffed skill number 2. So let's just immediately check what happened. Here he is in the wiki page. As we already know, the first skill got buffed, and it's, in my opinion, a very, very strong skill nowadays. The second skill never really was insanely strong. In fact, in some cases, the one-turn star absorb could be a demerit if you're using him as a support, but it's still a nice, solid 3-turn debuff immune for 3 turns on a 5-turn cooldown, making him easier to, you know, just protect. But now, after the buff, the first 2 effects remain the same, but there it is. They added a battery, and not just a small one. No. A full-on 50% battery. And this is very crazy because it's a 5-turn cooldown skill. If you guys know anything, the standard for a 50% battery was more or less a 6-turn cooldown, and usually there's not much to go on with it anyway. I mean, obviously there's still now the other stuff that used to exist already, but now with the battery, it's crazy good value. Like, it's so good. And in fact, I think this is exactly what he needed. And yeah, people can have their opinions of, oh, it's another battery buff, oh, how boring, but yes, it's still strong, let's be real. Now, as I was about to say, I think Sherlock was already in a pretty solid position. He was never like one of those units that you would always bring with you anyway, because he still is mostly there for utility purposes, and he's not even that great of a DPS himself. I still think his best case use will be a support case with maybe some little off DPS, but I think his main weakness was that it was not super easy to get his MP. Like, don't get me wrong, his gains are obviously not bad at all. In fact, depending on your turn, especially if you have some crits, it can be very good, but sometimes it just doesn't line up, and it's gonna take a while before you get his MP. And especially because you'd prefer to run CEs like 2030, Prisma Cosmos, etc. These good support Cs on him, which obviously don't even come with starting gauge. So it can be actually very difficult to get there. But with this, you can get a really great start and then just hopefully sustain your MP otherwise after the first one with your natural gains. So this is just a really, really great buff to get him going. Just very solid. And as you guys know, his MP is definitely very solid too, so it's very nice. Get that nice defense down. Full-on 3-turn party-wide, ignore invul and ignore defense for 3 turns. It's just very nice to have. And the crit damage on top is just a cherry. Now, let's talk about his placement now. Because this is what you guys are always interested about, huh? So yeah, this is the part 1. I think, or part 2. One of the extra tier lists I did earlier this year, obviously. But yeah, I usually tend to check these out as well on these buff breakdowns. So, I do think he definitely will go up with this. I had him placed on A, as you can see. And I really thought about this. And I will place him in A+ now. A++ rather, actually. That double plus. The only reason I'm not gonna place him in EX is because he's still not one of those that is always really needed or always will be super good in a team comp. But his utility is still great, and especially if you need it, he's gonna be amazing as a choice for a support that does a bit of damage as well. I think he is in a perfect spot right now for that utility support. And yeah, I don't really see him ever getting any more buffs. I'd be really surprised if they still buff him after this, because I think he's now looking very, very solid. So there you go. Sherlock. Not much to say about him because it's a fairly basic buff. But let's move on to the second one. Now, this is probably more relevant for more people because this next servant is way more accessible, and it is good old day 1 SR Mr. Sumanai. Yeah, they buffed him as well. So it's been a long time, even longer than since the Sherlock buff happened, that they buff Sumanai. So yeah, this is great because I think he was easily one of the weakest 4-stars in this day and age. So he definitely could have used a buff, and I'm glad they did it. And this buff in particular, while again not the most exciting buff ever, it enables him to have a brand new function in the meta, which is of course being able to buster farm now. So they did the same thing they did with Altera not too long ago, and I was very happy with that as well. So now we got basically the 4-star equivalent in Sumanai, everyone's favorite. So yeah, let's check what he does now. So this buff is for his first skill, his Golden Rule C-, which was, let's be real, a garbage skill. Not only did this not help, this number didn't help with his game much at all, it's also a 6-turn cooldown, which is ridiculous for something like this in this day and age. Now, the cooldown remains the same, the MP gain remains the same, but they added 2 new effects and they are both great. While not having a 50% battery like Sherlock, that would be insane, he does get a 30% battery, which completely enables him to farm now if you have the correct supports. And on top of that, he gets a, not 1 turn, but a 3-turn attack up to 30%. Very solid skill now. Now that is a modern 4-star 6-turn cooldown skill if you ask me. Very, very nice. Would have been nice if they buffed the MP gain as well, I suppose, but, you know, we'll take what we can get, right? Now, here's the thing. Again, this enables him to have a completely brand new role. His role in the game before this was very awkward. He was mostly used in challenge quests, especially if you could fight dragons, right? Because at that point, he can do enough damage to even fight, like, single-target bosses. But besides that, his farming was never good because he always lacked all these batteries and whatnot, so looping was always out of the question. And even outside of that, like MP setups, maybe you're doing like a double, triple setup, he still wasn't great, let's be real. His damage was also a bit on the lower side because as a 4-star, his attack sadly isn't super high. But with this, he now has a very solid spot in the game. Now, let's take a look at some numbers. Shout out to Jordanian, one of my community members, for making this list again. I'm probably even going to include this again in the description in case people want to see, but he has now been added to the looping sheet. And if we're going to take a look at the numbers here, he's solid. First of all, his main competition here for the Buster looping 4 stars on the Saber side is obviously Salter, Saber Alter if you will. Now, I can already tell you that their numbers on the same MP level without the dragon niche are very similar. There's not a big difference. I would say they're mostly interchangeable at that point, but there are many other points to consider here. First of all, because Sumanai has the 30% battery, he can actually run a 50% starting gauge CE, which not only makes the setup way easier to do, because you don't need a K-scope. There's a lot of these Cs, and especially the best ones in Aerial Drive and the Bunyan CE, they're both completely free to MLB, which is great. So that's first thing amazing. And second of all, it enables him to have more damage from the CE itself as well, which is great. Now, you do obviously still, in both cases, you do need the whole double Koyan Oberon system to do the farming. But if you do it, the numbers aren't too shabby, obviously. They are not bad at all, I want to say. In fact, again, this whole thing assumes MP1 across the board, so if you're like not like a big whale who doesn't have like high MP levels for your SSR options in like Altera, Arturia, etc., Sumanai could just he might just be your best option now, honestly. And that brings me to the second point in the comparison in him versus Salter, is that Salter is story locked, meaning it's much harder to get copies of her versus Sumanai. While they both are day 1, it is way easier to get copies of Sumanai. So chances are a lot of veteran players already have decent MP level on him to begin with, which again is great. So if you have like a higher level Sumanai versus your SSR options, if you even have them to begin with, he could just well be your #1 farmer option for Saber. So again, keep that in mind. it is we are entering now the reign of Sumanai, which is, hey, I'm all in for it, because this man has been on the weak side of all the servants for like 5-6 years now, so I'm finally glad to see him done some justice here. And as the cherry on top, another thing to mention here related to the farming is that obviously Buster farming is great for 90 plus nodes, the hardest farming nodes in the game, where a lot of the times arts kind of falters because of the enemy not being lined up in a 3-3-3 format, so Buster tends to be favored. And a lot of 90 plus nodes do feature enemies with the dragon trait, so in some cases you might even be able to make him be a farm on neutral damage, so that's another great thing he might be able to do depending on the actual node you're farming. So yeah. And obviously this is all not just for him to enable farming, this obviously helps him if you want to use him as a DPS too. I still don't think he's the greatest option when it comes to like challenge quests, especially compared to some of his peers like Barghest or Suzuka. I think those two would still do a better job in challenge quests overall. But hey, again, he is just better there as well. And I'm so glad he actually has this now, much like Altera. So they're not just in a very awkward position anymore. Now, again, sadly the list didn't save, or the cache, so I have to rebuild the list again for sabers, but here's basically all AoE sabers that are Buster, and these were the positions that I had after the Altera buff, basically. And as you can see, before this buff, Sumanai I had placed on a very sad C. That's just very sad. But now, I thought about this a lot. I knew he was going to be at least a B+. I will definitely place him above Salter now, being a way more accessible farmer, in many cases more damage as well, and I feel like he could do a better job in challenge quests as well. But I will place him in A as well. I will now place him in A. I thought about it, and I think it makes sense, because again, he could just be the best farming option for a lot of people. He's so accessible, great damage, just decent for bosses as well, maybe not the best, but especially for farming, he's just very solid now. So he jumps an entire 2 tiers because now he has a great purpose in the game. So finally, my man has been redeemed. Thank you, Lasagna. Claps all around. Great stuff. So there you go. We now have a brand new great farming option in Sumanai. So I think that's all I wanted to say, basically. Hopefully I didn't forget anything. And I might cut this video down a little bit as well if I just rambled too much. But hey, that was another episode of Buff Breakdown. Now, there will be Path to Lost Belt 7, and the next thing they're going to cover is Lost Belt 3 recap. So expect to see some Lost Belt 3 buff or buffs. I think it's next week, actually. So chances are there's going to be another episode of Buff Breakdown very soon. So stay tuned if you want to hear my opinion of these things. And yeah. If you enjoyed this though, please do me a solid. As always, press the like button. Really helps out a lot. Lets me know you like these videos and our algorithm is happy. Subscribe to not miss out on future uploads, because I am uploading quite a bit these days, so stay notified. And otherwise, I hope you have a great weekend. Alright, peace out my dudes.